Tonight, a House and Senate divided. Will the battle over Governor Abbott's priorities end with lawmakers in compromise or a special session? Plus, the Supreme Court steps in and extends access to an abortion pill. What's next in the Texas-based case? And later, bringing down the high cost of medications.
You know, Texans pay twice what Canadians pay for their prescription drugs.
How one state lawmaker hopes to lower the price of prescriptions for Texans. Capital Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capital Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. State lawmakers want to cut your property taxes, but the House and Senate are split over how best to do it. This week, the House passed a $12 billion plan, but it includes a controversial idea to tighten the state's appraisal cap on how much a home's taxable value can rise each year. Experts warn that could lead to major inequities among property owners and drive up housing costs. Last month, the Senate passed a different proposal which would raise the state's homestead exemption, giving an additional bump to seniors. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said the House's plan is dead on arrival in his chamber, arguing it wouldn't benefit seniors whose appraisals are already capped.
And so we can negotiate on just about everything, but I do not negotiate on bad math.
After the House passed its plan, Speaker Phelan remained defiant, saying, quote, "That should send a message." We want to bring in our reporter roundtable now to discuss the past week in Texas politics. Joining us are Patrick Svitek of the Texas Tribune and Jasper Scherer with the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News. Good to see you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming in and being with us virtually. Jasper, I'll start with you. I mean, shots fired between Phelan and Speaker Dave Phelan and Patrick on these property tax proposals. How do you work out such a division on this plan with the time that's left?
Yeah, it's a total game of legislative chicken right now. It's, you know, there are some ways where maybe these two proposals could be compatible. Maybe you could, you know, do both, switch up the appraisal caps and the homestead exemption. At the same time, though, you know, Dan Patrick has been pretty unequivocal about, you know, you heard in that last clip. So, and this is an issue that really animates him. It's what kind of got him into politics in the first place. He hasn't given any indication that he's going to compromise. So we could end up in a case where maybe nothing gets passed and they just do some other type of approach, like just simply buying down property taxes, not actually making any changes that are being debated. So we'll just have to see.
Well, Patrick, what's your take on this? I mean, who caves first and how do you see this playing out?
Look, they both have substantive reasons for their positions in this and for the reasons that they're dug in on their respective proposals. But, this is politics, too. And I think part of it is just, there's a prideful aspect to this. I mean, these are two legislative leaders who don't really like one another. And so they want their signature policy proposal to be the one that wins out at the end of the day. And it's hard to not blame their confidence in their position, given that they have near unanimous support in each of their chambers for these proposals. I think in the case of the Senate, it is unanimous support. They're both dug in. Phelan has signaled more of a willingness to compromise. You know, he wants appraisal caps, but he said it doesn't mean we can't increase the homestead exemption as well. While Patrick is, as he said, is unwilling to compromise.
Yeah, I mean, Jasper, there's also been a big divide over private school vouchers, as we've seen playing out in the House and Senate. The Senate's passed a Patrick and Abbott-backed plan. House shot down funding vouchers in its budget debate, in its budget plan last week. So is that the end of this debate? Do you see vouchers going anywhere?
Certainly not the end of the debate, but I think you could still see a lot more conversation about it with not a whole lot of movement as far as, you know, the votes that supporters of vouchers or voucher-like programs will need to pick up in the House. As we saw in that sort of kind of a litmus test vote, it's not the end-all be-all, but it showed where the House stands. And there were, I believe, 24 Republicans who voted against or who expressed support for the anti-voucher amendment. So the supporters would have to flip around half of those and, you know, keep everyone else on board. And a lot of those folks are from rural areas and they haven't really been given any reason to change their vote at this point. So I think what we'll be watching is how these, the nuts and bolts of how these proposals might change. Are there any carrots given to those members?
Yeah, kind of the changes that we could see here. Patrick, I want to switch gears real quickly. Governor Abbott also pledging to pardon Daniel Perry, who was convicted of murdering an Austin protester. Abbott cited self-defense laws in this, but there's been some new evidence that shows Perry made racist comments and regularly made clear his desire to kill protesters ahead of this whole incident. I mean, how do you think this plays out politically for Abbott? Do you see him kind of changing course on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty embarrassing for Abbott, given that he was so hasty to call for a pardon or to say that he would approve a pardon, for Perry. And then all this evidence comes out, as you said, of racist comments, more comments showing his state of mind in the lead up to this incident. So it's very damaging for Abbott. What he does next remains to be seen. He may just try to ride this out and just avoid all public scrutiny of it, not answer the media's questions. He could also ultimately, not that this is a profile in courage, but he could also ultimately just have the defer to the pardon and paroles board on this and let them slow walk it, as the public spotlight fades on it. But this new evidence, as you just pointed out, really puts his call for a pardon in a pretty unflattering light.
Yeah, we'll see how all of this plays out. We're going to have to leave it there. Jasper Scher, Patrick Svitek, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines this week. The Texas House overwhelmingly passed a bill to prohibit race-based hair discrimination in schools, workplaces, and housing. The Crown Act would ban discrimination based on certain hairstyles like braids, twists, and dreadlocks. The vote sends it to the Senate, where an identical bill has not yet been heard. House members also approved legislation to fund community colleges based on student performance. Public community colleges would get state funding based on how many students graduate or transfer to a four-year university. Under current policy, community colleges funding is mostly based on how many hours students spend in class. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is under fire after it was revealed he sold property to Texas GOP megadonor Harlan Crow and did not disclose it. Thomas has been facing criticism after a report found he took multiple undisclosed luxury trips with Crow for decades. But this is the first instance of money changing hands between them, which must be reported if more than $1,000. The Supreme Court is keeping the FDA abortion pill rules in place for now. This comes after the Justice Department asked the High Court to step in following a Texas judge's ruling limiting access to the abortion medication mifepristone. It's the most important abortion-related dispute to reach the High Court since the justices overturned Roe v. Wade last summer. Kevin Fry has more.
Nearly a year after the Supreme Court overturned the constitutional right to an abortion, the fight over access has returned to the justice's doorstep. On Friday, the Biden administration and the maker of the most common abortion drug, mifepristone, asked the justices to put on hold a ruling by a lower court restricting access to the medication. This while their appeal of that lower court's ruling is decided.
We believe that the law is on our side and we will prevail.
In court papers, the Biden White House argued that if allowed to take effect, the lower court's orders would upend the regulatory regime for mifepristone, with sweeping consequences for the pharmaceutical industry, women who need access to the drug, and FDA's ability to implement its statutory authority. In its legal brief, the maker of the drug wrote that the ruling is equally flawed on the merits and would require the drug maker to submit its product back to the FDA for approval, a process they say could take months. This all began a week ago when a federal judge in Texas suspended the Food and Drug Administration's 2-decade-old approval of the pill. An appeals court in New Orleans this week reinstated access, but with restrictions, including preventing it from being mailed to patients. In a brief order issued late Friday, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito issued a temporary stay of the Texas judge's ruling until the court begins to hear arguments in the case. He asked all parties to submit legal briefs by Tuesday. In a statement Friday, one of the lawyers for the challengers in the mifepristone case wrote that the appeals court rightly required the agency to prioritize women's health by restoring critical safeguards and will urge the Supreme Court to keep that accountability in place. One thing is certain, last summer's Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe v. Wade was hardly the last word on abortion. This latest legal fight shows abortion will continue to be a major issue in the nation's political life. At the Supreme Court, Kevin Fry, Capitol Tonight.
The Texas judge's ruling has led to heightened scrutiny over the background and personal views of federal judge Matthew Kacsmaryk. His conservative legal experience is raising questions, but in his Senate confirmation hearing, he vowed to stay impartial. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante takes a closer look.
Constitutionality.
Some experts in health law say they were surprised by the language Texas U.S. District Court Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk used in his bombshell ruling last Friday, making the most widely used abortion pill unavailable nationwide.
The ruling reads like somebody who is a anti-abortion activist, not like a federal judge who is tasked with interpreting past law.
The judge wrote the drug mifepristone, quote, ultimately starves the unborn human until death, and that the second drug in the two-step regimen to terminate a pregnancy, quote, induces cramping and contractions to expel the unborn human from the mother's womb.
This has never happened where a federal judge is trying to enjoin the FDA's actions on a drug that has been on the market for over 23 years.
By filing their case in federal court in Amarillo, opponents of abortion rights were virtually assured Kacsmaryk would hear it. Kacsmaryk was the deputy general counsel for the conservative law firm First Liberty Institute when President Donald Trump nominated him to the federal bench. Democratic senators repeatedly questioned his past legal work and statements on LGBTQ rights, and one asked if he would bring his own religious beliefs into cases before him.
I don't serve as a legislator. I don't serve as an advocate for counsel. I follow the law as it is written, not as I would have written it.
The Washington Post reported that Kacsmaryk has long held anti-abortion views, citing a picture where one of his children wore a t-shirt that said, "I survived Roe versus Wade." Some constitutional law professors say allegations he is biased are unfair.
There are lots of judges who bring their philosophical and political views to the bench, but it's only religious people who are charged with such a claim. I think there are problems with the judge's ruling, but I don't think that's because of his religious beliefs. I think he simply made judicial errors.
Whether the judge's politics played a role in his decision or not, it was the most consequential ruling against abortion rights since the Supreme Court overturned the constitutional right to an abortion last summer. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
And still to come on Capitol Tonight, schoolhouse talk. More on the ongoing debate in the state legislature over school vouchers. And the cost of prescription drugs, why one state lawmaker is looking for help up north to help prices go south. Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier in the program, the fight over private school vouchers continues at the Capitol. This week, public school teachers testified against a bill that would allow parents to use tax dollars to send their child to a private or charter school. It is a priority of Governor Abbott, but so far only the Senate is showing support. But as our Charlotte Scott reports, both sides know the fight is not over until it's over.
Yolanda Merritt has been a special education teacher at Spring ISD for 15 years.
I'm for the students who can't speak. I'm for the students who are learning how to eat, how to clothe themselves.
She does not support a so-called school choice program, which would allow parents to take public school tax dollars and use them for a different type of education.
It just hurts my heart to think that we want to take public dollars and use it for a specific population of students.
Quality of public school is
North Texas Representative James Frank defended his bill Tuesday. It would create education savings accounts using $500 million that would be managed by the comptroller.
It's good for parents, it's good for kids, and it's good for schools.
Low-income families would be eligible for $10,300. Wealthier children or those already enrolled in private school would be eligible for half that amount. But not all lawmakers are sold on the idea.
Why not just take these limited funds that we have and make sure that we create a setting for every child?
There is a constitutional issue that we need to address one way or the other.
One Texan who showed up to testify says the money would allow his daughter, Mary, who has Down syndrome, to go to a private school.
Both my wife and I work, but we're still making clear under $100,000, and this would help us to get another option for my daughter's education.
The purpose of an education system is to educate kids, not to prop up any particular system.
Nathan Kaneen is with the American Federation for Children. Last week's House vote to prohibit voucher funding in the budget sent a strong signal these bills likely aren't going anywhere. But Kaneen is banking on the conference committee, a smaller group of lawmakers in the House and Senate who figure out the final budget behind closed doors, will remove that amendment and allow school choice funding.
That amendment is not yet law. The Senate has passed a compelling school choice bill, and with Texas leadership and support, I have a lot of hope that we can get school choice done this year.
But Merritt wishes the $500 million would instead go to teacher raises, more resources, and licensed psychologists on public school campuses.
It would be unimaginable some of the things that we could do with that money.
For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Texas lawmakers are considering reforms aimed at lowering prescription drug costs. One priority bill that's passed the House would authorize the state's health commission to develop a plan to import certain prescription drugs from Canada. It would have to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The bill's author says the program would result in savings of 60 to 70% for consumers and millions of dollars for state agencies on prescription drug costs. I spoke with the bill's author, Central Texas Representative James Tallarico, earlier this week. Here's what he had to say about how this would make it cheaper for Texas consumers.
We have the most unaffordable prescription drugs in the industrialized world. And so this bill would allow Texas to safely import certain prescription drugs from Canada for a lot less. The estimates are about 60 to 70% less. So this would provide affordable, cheap prescription drugs for Texans who desperately need them.
Yeah, during a hearing on this, some pharmaceutical groups testified against it, citing safety risks, safety concerns about bringing non-U.S. made drugs into Texas. I mean, what is the risk to health and safety?
There is no risk. This bill is creating a plan to import some drugs from Canada, but that would have to be approved by the FDA. Every step of the process would have to be FDA approved. And so this bill is a safe pathway to bring some of those affordable prescription drugs back to Texas. And I should say that organizations and political leaders across the spectrum support this bill. Donald Trump supports this bill, and so does Bernie Sanders. You rarely get those two on the same page. The only folks who aren't supportive of this bill are the pharmaceutical companies who profit off of the suffering of Americans to the tune of $90 billion a year.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, I think that there's a lot of people looking at this and being like, well, why can't it be made in Texas? Why do we have to go to Canada for this? Another argument. I mean, would this affect the local economy at all?
You know, I would love for our state to invest in infrastructure to produce generic prescription drugs here at home. And there's some conversations about us doing that one day. But right now, Texans need help because 40% of Texans are skipping doses or going without their medication entirely because they can't afford it. And about 250,000 Americans are dying every year because they're not taking their medicine as prescribed. And so we've got a dangerously unsafe status quo, and that has to change. That's why Republicans and Democrats are coming together in our legislature to bring some of those affordable prescription drugs from our neighbors to the north back home to Texas.
Representative Tallarico, you were also a co-sponsor of a bill that passed the House this week to decriminalize fentanyl test strips. Wanted to ask you about that real quickly. I mean, how much do you think this will help in combating the rising number of opioid overdose deaths here in the state?
This is another bipartisan, common sense piece of legislation that we passed today. You can buy a test strip for about $1 that can tell you if a pill is laced with deadly fentanyl. But Texas is one of a handful of states that won't let you buy that test strip. This bill can save lives. We are in the grips of a deadly fentanyl crisis, and this is just one tool in our toolbox to keep our neighbors safe.
And still to come on Capitol Tonight, it's been 100 days since Republicans took control of the U.S. House. What the GOP has accomplished since Speaker McCarthy took the gavel. Welcome back. It's been 100 days since Republicans on Capitol Hill regained the majority in the U.S. House. While off to a rocky start, they're still touting the promises that they say they've kept to voters. Torian Small is in Washington with what they have and have not accomplished so far.
It was not the smoothest start for House Republicans when their election for Speaker dragged on for days. But since Kevin McCarthy won the gavel, the GOP has pushed the fast forward button on its agenda.
I think what we've been able to achieve, a new select committee on China with 146 Democrats voting with us, stopping the vaccine mandate in the military and ending the pandemic, having federal employees come back to work.
3 major Republican House bills have been passed by Democrats in the Senate and signed by President Joe Biden. One ended a COVID emergency declaration. Another pushed the administration to declassify information on the origins of the pandemic. And the third rejected reforms to the District of Columbia's criminal laws. Republicans also passed bills to enact several of the promises they ran on, including legislation to make oil drilling easier, give parents a greater voice in local schools, and block the hiring of 87,000 IRS employees, in part to increase audits of the rich. But those measures have died in the Senate.
The Senate is not going to waste our time on a bill that sets America back decades in our transition to clean energy.
And House Republicans have made no progress toward an agreement on raising the government's borrowing limit. McCarthy says there will be no deal unless Biden agrees to spending reductions. But Republicans have yet to agree among themselves on what to cut.
Everyone is warning us that if we don't pass a debt ceiling increase, there will be catastrophic consequences that will have ripple down effects for everybody, whether they know it or not.
Experts say the government will reach its debt limit sometime this summer, unless Congress raises it, which means the next 100 days for House Republicans could far become more consequential than the first. In Washington, Torian Small, Spectrum News.
And before we go tonight, a nice honor from the Alliance for Women in Media, the Austin affiliate. Spectrum News was represented well, taking home a number of awards, including Local Journalist of the Year for yours truly. I couldn't do any of what I do without my remarkable team and continued support from you, our viewers. So thank you very much. It was a fun evening. And that is going to do it for this edition of Capitol Tonight. We're back again on Monday with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.